Hello, my friends. Back after like a month off. I just talked to John. We're hoping that the internet this time is going to be better than it's been in the past. I just looked at my Ableton. It's like 75% CPU. I don't know why that is. Oh yeah, John. I see John on there. I'll grab him. How's everybody doing? Grabbing John. You got the big illuminated window background there. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm first day of 37 years old, so
how's it
you know
feel?
What that's like.
Yeah, I've been there a couple of years ago.
Feels truly unremarkable.
Happy belated.
Thank you. Truly unremarkable at such a weird age. You know, you've transitioned to your late 30s. You're no longer in your mid 30s.
37's not one of those years that you don't get like a quinceañera type of vibe for 37 years old. Although, by the way, you should go do it if you feel go rent a park and have a
sure, feel free.
Put on a dress, do the thing, you know, whatever you feel. It's your birthday.
I do like to try to reflect on every birthday kind of being your version of a new year. Like January 1st is the forced upon calendar new year, but the birthday is supposed to be the new year for you. And so I'm sure I'll find some things to reflect on. I don't know where I'm at just yet. It was a nice relaxing weekend and kind of getting back to it today. So
nice. Did you have a nice? You went to Santa Barbara or something? Did your culinary vibes?
I went to Santa Barbara. It was a lot of relaxing, walking, eating. It was cold as fuck. Rainy. It was perfect. It was beautiful.
Nice, man. Well, yeah, I just got back from a couple of weeks abroad, which is one of the reasons we were off. I was in Paris and London, and it was a trip full of adventure, and it was fantastic. And saw some London friends, and did a few sessions, and did some good socializing. And it's actually really nice to be back. I just I guess I got back. It's Tuesday. I got back Sunday night pretty late, and then was able to stay up until 11 p.m. and then woke up at 4 a.m. But today I slept all the way until about 5:20. So get back on a pretty normal schedule soon.
Wow. Yeah. That's always really rough.
But it's great.
What were the fruits of the journey?
Well,
musically speaking.
Yeah. Some good personal life stuff, which I'll tell you about offline, but musically just great. I mean, you know, I've, as people probably know here, especially before the pandemic, I've spent a lot of time in the UK. You know, a couple of my first big songs were the One Direction and Little Mix and very UK centered projects. So I spent a lot of time out there, and I worked on the X Factor TV show for a few years as a producer with my dear friend and great producer writer Chris Wallace. We went out there for a couple consecutive years. So I was spending about a third of my time in London before the pandemic. So it's always good to go back there and work, and working a bit on this Katie Baser project, who's a new artist out of the UK, and the single I just helped finish and produce and mix for her. The song Pretty Boys just charted. Actually, when I was there, it charted in the top 40. It's her first charting song. So really like great coincidence that's happening. And
yes.
And so got to go have label meetings, and, you know, as good advice for anybody watching these things, as soon as you have anything that does, even if you're making local music and one of your songs starts to be the song, go capitalize on it. Go have meetings, go say hi to people, just smile and raise your hand when they go, "You're the guy that did that." You go, "Yes, guy, girl, whatever." Just love being involved. Just go do that stuff. So I had some label meetings and had some great sessions, and got to hang out in London, eat some Indian food, you know, do the thing. It was great. So I'll probably, my plan is to go back out there for the summer, spend a couple of months out there. I might go back a little bit sooner depending on, you know, potential work things. There's always potential reasons to go out there, but it was great. And I heard that despite it being end of February in London, the weather was better there than it was here, where it was blizzarding and
it was terrible,
snowing in Silver Lake and all of that.
Yeah. That sounds like I missed that completely. Song. I did mix a Christmas song for Noah Cyrus before I left for the holidays called Snow in LA. And it actually happened this year for the first time, I guess, in 20 years. So
yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So have you've been working pretty much nonstop. How's the last few weeks?
Just finished up this Black album that's dropping on the 24th. I have to go to the Atmos, actually starting right after this. So it's actually not fully done. That's been the most of the time wrapping up that kind of, few singles and one-offs after that, but really, getting to really go in on an album. It's just, man, we get to talk about it sometimes, but it's so rare. It's just been, it's how do we do that more as mixers and, have attended sessions, artists, producers in the room, Six came a couple of times and just like, even if he wants to just hear it in his AirPods, but like do the tweaks in the room, it's better. It's just a better workflow. So I had a lot of fun with that. That's probably the thing I'll reflect on most this year of what my new year looks like work-wise, not necessarily on a personal tip. But although that correlates too, like having the social aspect of being in the studio, something I've missed since the pandemic, not producing anymore. Just having the team over here was amazing. Fingers crossed, I actually got a call right before this about an album, and it will be a whole project. I would love it if the team came. I'm really gunning for more albums. I'd rather budgets be lower and whole projects be made, right? So that's kind of something I feel like happens a lot, which is like teams and artists come in being like, afford Castelli or so-and-so for the singles, but someone else is going to mix the album. It's like, well, how do we make it worthwhile to keep the projects concise and cohesive? So I want to be a little more flexible on things like that. I think that flexibility is probably what makes the best mixers and producers consistently get hired and, maintain relationships. So I really want, I want full bodies of work to be represented as they should be when possible. So hopefully that'll happen. So the last project being a full album. I'm also working on another full album, actually, I should say too. That's a bit more like, the artist is on tour and, sending songs here and there. That's different than like, hey, you got 6, like, let's fucking go. And then like, by the time you finish those 6, the next 6 are there. That's a little different. These are kind of coming in, but the artist is on tour and he's like working all over the place and the producer's with him. And that's a little different than what I'm talking about, but getting to really dive in. I think that's what I want to spend most of this year doing creatively.
Yeah, I like the way you're talking about that. I've been thinking about that more too. I think there's 2 very good reasons for me and probably you and probably for most people why it's good to work on bigger projects or longer projects, even if the money is less. I think one, it's more satisfying to just go deeper with people. I think we all, there's certainly more technical people that watch some of these and listen to some of these that are much more interested in kind of like, mastering engineers who may not spend weeks and months with an artist. But for most of us that are writer, producer, mixer, that really there's a joy that comes with going deep with an artist and really getting into their headspace and really contributing to a project. And I also think that for me, doing that makes me more invested in the work, and therefore I do better work. We talk so much about trying really hard to do things that you love, and that's 2 reasons. One is that wouldn't you rather do something you love than not? I mean, that's like a basic happiness thing. But 2, I think everybody does better work when you're really invested in something. I've been thinking about that too. I mean, trying to be more involved with artists in the long term, even if it doesn't mean, especially as a writer producer, like I don't have any illusions that I'm going to find a pop artist signed to a label and I'm going to write and produce the whole thing. I mean, what like our friend Tyler Johnson does, that's a pretty rare thing to have you and one person and the artist do multiple albums these days, especially on the level that he's able to do it. But I do like the idea of just maintaining a relationship, and maybe you can speak to this too, because I think with Black you produced, or you mixed not the most recent one, but one before that. But then
one of those stories where I talked about this. Yes, that's that story. Exactly. That's one of a few that I have where it's like, you help develop a sound early on. The artist gets successful. They have the budget, so they go to Serban or Manny. And for this case, they had Manny mix the last project, and third album came back, and it was honestly the joy of last year to get that call. It was like I had just had SZA come out, or it was about the same time, and I was like, that's super cool. I love SZA, but getting the call to do Black's album was like way like the most exciting call to get in years because of that story that I've talked about so many times on here. And I get why artists do that when they have access. I don't really take it personally, but yeah, he you know, I'm a fan of him. Like, I'm a fan of him as a person. I like his stories. I like his relatability. I relate to his lyrics. This album is something that I understand. Like, I feel connected to it. I feel like there's no way that anybody else could have mixed this album. I also think, like, back to something you just said, like, you wind up doing your best work and you're around people. I want to actually think about it even different. I think I do my best work when I'm around the team and people too. But I actually think that it's not my best work. It's just the most real work, because you're so invested in the artist's idea in the room and making it sound like they want it. It might not be my best sonic work, and it doesn't have to be, because everybody loves it that worked on it and everybody's happy with it. I might listen to it when it drops next week or in 2 weeks and go, damn, I could have, you know, made this one hit harder or brighter or blah, 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 or whatever I could think of can get better. But I know it's as good as it can get or have gotten because we all decided upon it in the space, in the room. When you're locked in by yourself and you haven't gotten that feedback, you can question it decades past if it was the right or wrong decision. But I will not harp on any decisions that were made after I hear it out in the world, because we made them together. And yeah. I think there's something to be said about multiple people in the room saying, this is good. Like, let's move on now. A lot of times people like you and I get paid to say it's done. We talk about that a lot. Like, we're finalizers. Yes, the mastering engineer, like, you know, packages it, but we're the last to say, like, this is tight. If it went out like this, everyone agrees that we're pushing this, and there's a responsibility there. And I think that, I don't know if I said this on a couple episodes ago, I don't like to repeat myself too much, but I had dinner with the kind of engineer group friend of mine, and Rory said to me, because I'm really kind of trying to figure out what's next sonically for me. Like, I've been doing a similar thing for a few years now since we've been talking, and obviously now, like, I've been joking about the fact that I compress a lot. Like, I've been really diving back into what it means, the art of compression. And Rory said Jon's best mix is going to be a mix he doesn't like, and I love that just as a kind of a mantra going into this year of, I think some of the Black mixes are a little pushed for my taste previously, and I think they go really fucking hard. I think like there's an aggression and a not untamedness to it that I normally would be a little uncomfortable about, but I love it. And I'm accepting of where it got to. And I don't know if that would have happened if I was alone. I think I would have geeked out a little bit more.
This is one of those topics that really relates to everybody. And I was just with was I with, I can't remember who, I don't want to name him because I don't remember who I was having this conversation with. One of the producers I was hanging out with in the UK, friends of mine, we were talking about notes, as we've talked about on here before, that, you know, when you, as a producer, as a mixer, whatever, do a version of something, by and large, you're going, this is the way I want it to sound. I think it sounds great. I'm going to send it off. And then you're like, great, I like the thing. And then there's that inevitable, like, I hope they like it. Hope there aren't a lot of notes. Hope, you know, the ideal in our minds is, I'm going to send this off and they're going to go, this is perfect. You're amazing.
Never
Here's
happens.
the money. Everybody wins. It's very, very rare for that to happen. And then every time you get notes, if you get 10 notes from the A&R, you kind of go like, I don't know. But then when you actually dig into them, the vast majority of times it makes it better, and it's not something you would have done. Mm-hmm. And the work is improved and your brain is opened. You know, if you're pushing mixes and you're like, I wouldn't normally do it like this, but you're the artist, and then it gets pushed and you're like, that sounds good. I wouldn't have done it that way, but maybe now it's a tool in my arsenal for the future. The value of those notes, as frustrated as it is, because, you know, we have to have an amount of ego in this thing to want to pursue something that's so intense and so nuanced and so subtle. You also get pushed back, and that makes you better. I think that's the collaborative process that's so great, and I can't wait to hear the album. And there's one song that's come out. How much has come out?
Oh, yeah, one's out with the video. the video's sick. He did an amazing job. And another one comes out this week, and another one the week after, and then the album drops the following week on the 24th. But what I was just thinking when you're saying that is like the leaning into this uncomfortable, decision to like, a lot of it had to do, honestly, a lot of it had to do with the rough mixes were a little pushed, and I co-mixed it with his engineer JT, who's an amazing engineer. It's just his vocal effect concepts are really, really unique, and they definitely make Black sound like him. Like a lot of the choices are made. I got to thankfully add some, and in the room, like Six was like, "Yo, could we try a little bit more flavor on that, a little more sauce on this?" And I got to do that, or I'd be like, "Yo, JT, you do that." Like that's your relationship to this project too. And I heard that a lot with Derek, who's Don Tolliver's engineer on the new Don Tolliver project. The vocal effects are the best part of the album, in my opinion, and that's all there. That's Derek. Like, so there's these engineer collabs with artists and developing a sound texturally and effect wise, and that's definitely true with Six. So I wanted to maintain that. But some of the rough mixes were really pushed, and there's a good energy, and I wanted to maintain that. So instead of being resistant to it, like I have in the past, and say, well, I can make this better, and whatever. What I've been learning with I don't normally do this, but I've been studying like a lot. I've been listening to a lot of mixes that have come out by Spike, by Serban, by everybody. And there's one consistent thing to these like overtly loud, nearly and some crazily distorted mixes, for better or for worse. There's this like tension. There's this like teenage angst. Like it's like we're making music for teenagers, like always. That's pretty much what we're doing. Unless you're doing some heady jazz record or maybe like a progressive R&B album, like I mixed for Tank and the Bangas, and like it's like artful and loose, like Jeff Giddy production and real like playing and Terrace Martin and that squad like that is a real like Continuum-esque Manny mix, like going for that really like realistic thing. But a lot of the pop music sounds really dense and really tense is the word that I've been kind of coming to, and that comes from compression. Like that's what Nirvana records sounded like. There's something that I came up listening to that I loved, but also haven't really figured out a way to do it with the amount of low end that I've also think that's that like we've talked about the challenge. Confessions album, that's the big challenge. So I think I was able to achieve that on this album. Someone in the thread said like the kick goes hard on this new Black record that came out, but it sounds pushed and he hears the push, and it's like it's very intentional. This song doesn't have as much low end as other ones, especially the one coming out this Thursday. But there's something about figuring out that balance, and there's only real way to do that is compression. So I'm just messing around with a bunch of different styles and like really relearning the SSL style compression that I used to use before I met Tony, like early on. Then when I met Tony, I learned about different things and I stopped using like the SSL. And I'm kind of going back down that hole where I was when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and I didn't know any better. And I think we talked about the Dale Becker call, like as the first episode of this year. And a lot of his notes to me was like, don't be afraid to look back. Like when you were turning heads, like when you got Tony's attention, when you like what got you to a certain place. And a lot of those mixes, I didn't have any money, so I only had like the Waves SSL bundle, right? So I did like the whole, every sound had the SSL channel, and the mix bus had the thing, and the drum bus had the SSL compressor. So I'm kind of going back down that with a slightly different approach, but that's an intentional move kind of back in time for me. So this is the first album that I've got a chance to kind of fuck with it.
That's very, very cool. I've had my own version of that before I went to London. I'm working on a couple of things that are very contemporary, a couple of big artists that are really in the past have been very forward pushing sonically. And so I've been trying to explore what's out there that sounds new. And, there's a lot of the kind of post PC music, 100 gecs hyperpop thing that I think has been exciting the last couple of years. I was trying to kind of dig into what else sounds new and fresh. Have you dug into the 2 Skrillex albums?
Yes, I have. That's what we need to talk about.
Holy shit.
I mean,
is that dude still great?
I'm such a big fan, man.
they're so good. I mean, you know, he released the one and then a second one, and something like a quarter of the tracks had already come out in various forms in the last year or two. But he really continues to be maybe the best sound designer. I'm just like purely making sounds, and talk about gain staging and limiting and compression, and how he does that is a little bit mysterious. I know that he's excuse me, he released one of the songs a couple of years ago. The official audio on YouTube was him pressing play in the Ableton session and kind of navigating around a little bit. And there are many hours of YouTube videos analyzing that video, and he's done some Twitch stuff. But man, the way he gets loudness and clarity, I think, is even more spectacular than it was a decade ago when he was doing it. I mean, somebody said on there, Supersonic is one of the most insane sounding songs. There's this song, I think it's Xena, Xena, with what sounds like maybe an Indian or Middle Eastern singer. Forgive me for not knowing the culture, but Xena off the new album, one of the new albums, is the most absurd sounding, like his compression and clarity and mid-range EQ and what he's doing with filtering and how he gets loudness. And it's insane how good that stuff is. And so I've been kind of trying to recreate a thing here or there and just kind of experiment with different kinds of bussing. And it's really, it's funny because I'm working on, I was just texting with somebody last night about coming back, and are you going to take a break when you come back? And I was like, I got 10 productions to finish right now. I had 2 before I left, which I of course told the people I'll work on this when I'm over there. And then immediately things got crazy. I was over there and I did sessions and added a bunch of production stuff. So I got tons of stuff to do. And they're all over the place, which is a really comfortable place for me, where there's a few things that need to be really loud and really exciting, and try to participate in setting the tone for what 2023 and 2024 is going to sound like sonically with pop records. And then there's other stuff which is sort of classic and throwback. And it's been really interesting coming back to a room I'm pretty comfortable with on monitors on my PMC 228s that I really understand the high end on, and like go between these records. It's been a really interesting exploration process. So have you dug into these Skrillex albums?
I have. I don't know them by name, but what I wanted to talk about with them is exactly what you're saying. The sound design, the arrangement, stacking. I don't even want to necessarily talk about it in mix terms, because I feel like it's all done in the sound design.
It's all one creative thing.
But there's something about the when you're listening on PMCs, especially like I have these, crazy tall 3-ways. I literally can hear where the sound stops and another one begins, and there's zero overlap. There's no mixing to be done. There's no like the keyboard has the same low end as the bass. The bass is just sub, and it's -6, -7 loudness, and the sub is so freaking tight and low and clear, not distorted. Nothing's distorted, and it's so loud. Nobody does that. No pop mixer makes their stuff that loud and not distorted. I don't understand it, but to me, it's arrangement. To me, it's stacking, where the sound ends. I've been like, since it came out on some of the projects I'm doing, because I used to mix like this, right? So Spider and I, when Bangarang came out, we used to really geek about, and Scary Monsters, we used to really geek about where sounds ended. Yes. And how you can filter.
When you say where sounds ended, you're talking about the frequency range that they occupy. There's a lot of cutting off the high and cutting off the low, and high and low pass filters to put things in certain ranges.
If you were to take a Pro Q3 analyzer, you would literally see nothing on either side of wherever the sound source is. Not like a little rumble, like literally nothing. So what we were experimenting with, which I think is part of the analysis you're talking about that people have done on him, is like, well, he'll do that, or we'll do that, and then we'll limit after, or he'll multi-band compress after that. But you're arranging the sound so there's a hard cut. Maybe there's a brick wall filter. I don't like to go super brick wall, but maybe you do, right? And then you're placing these sounds in that arrangement, and nothing is overlapping. And there's so much clarity when you do that. In a lot of pop productions, there's an acoustic guitar, and there's an electric guitar, and there's a piano, and then an organ, and then there's a Juno, and they all operate between 200 and 800 hertz. That's not a Skrillex. So when someone says make it sound like that, arrange it that way. Put only a sub bass. Put only this mid bass growl layer. Put only a keyboard part on the right hand of the piano, not the left hand. Like if you want it to sound like that, you have to arrange it that way. You have to sound design it that way. Otherwise, things overlap, cause mud, and then things can't get that loud and clear. It's very simple to me. It is masterful. I don't know the names of the songs. I listen to it for pure pleasure.
Totally.
It is so gives me chills. Like when I hear, like, there's a record that the bass, the resonance of the bass in the drops is just so fulfilling. If we're talking frequency, there's probably nothing above 400 or 500 hertz. It's so low pass, but it's so musical. It's in like the one with the rat-a-tat-tat-tar.
Is it the Missy Elliott one?
No, the one before that one. Sorry, the one before the Missy Elliott record. So I don't know the names. I listen to it with my screensaver on, just down or in the car, and I can't see the names of the songs, so I don't know them. And I wish I did for these kinds of conversations. But it's in a lot of the records. But so there's pretty samey in his characteristics of the record. He's an artist. I mean, he has very similar sound choices. Yeah. He's a sound. So the bass is pretty quintessential to a Skrillex drop, but his fills, the way he transitions musically, the way things drop out, come back in, like that's the DJ aspect of it all. Is this like, how do I make these events happen? Like when I think, someone says is Skrillex credit as mixer, absolutely. He's credited as a co-mixer, with someone else on each song. Some of them are the same guy. So I don't know who this other guy is, but he's credited on every song, yes. And I think that's really important to note that he's clearly highly engaged in that process. And I almost would say that it's part of the process, and there's no finishing aspect to the process, that it's happening the whole way through.
That's my understanding as well, yeah.
Yeah. So when I hear his events, like it makes me want to make events happen in pop music, like these 4-bar loop sections, and then like something big happens. So I was just mixing the song recently that kind of has like this late 70s tip to it, like a lot of percussion, high energy. And if there's a fill, I'm turning that fill up. You know what I mean? Like wait, Tyler is saying Tom Norris comics some. I love Tom, and I was looking for the credit. I didn't see him credited. I was hoping that Tom worked on it, because I know he's worked in the past. I didn't see him credited at all. I hope he did, because Tom's one of the best. And I'm going to text him about this later to find out if he did it. So I think that there's so much to learn from Skrillex when it comes to arrangement. I don't care about his mix skills. No one can mix like him. I'm not going to try to mix like him. I'm not going to say that the answer is to put filters on everything and put them in its place. That's in the process. That's when you're playing the part and you're like, oh, that's competing with the so-and-so. They're not fixing that in the mix. Someone come at me and tell me that they are and show me an example of that arrangement, and there's stacking of frequencies in the same. I doubt it.
Well, it's something that has been said before. I think I saw actually Rory on the Discord say something about this recently, that loudness is really about, so these are kind of the same thing when I'm talking about arrangement / EQ, where things fit in the frequency spectrum. And we've certainly talked about this before, where so many people think loudness is what limiters and what clipping and all that. Loudness is about what's taking up what in the frequency, in the entire frequency range. And if you can make it so that the entire frequency range is filled up, but nothing's overlapping, then you have Skrillex records. Yes. I mean, you have these records that you can get up to like -4, and they sound like Purple Lamborghini, that record he did with Rick Ross years ago. I think it's on some movie soundtrack. It gets to -3 something, and it is a little distorted, but the loudness is in all of the different elements in the mix, the drums, the synths, the bass, all of that, just never running into each other, all pumping and moving and, but all within their own frequency range. And that's how you get loudness. Loudness is, you can get a dB or so off of the right clipper and limiter and all that, but loudness in a track, and the feeling of loudness especially, is about EQ and arrangement, and making decisions. I mean, this is, I love that you brought the cello frequencies as a term into my vernacular. I think about the orchestra and how an orchestra is arranged, and you have instruments that occupy, they even have different notation, like treble clef, bass clef, yes, C clef. There's literally notation for the different places that these instruments occupy, so that you get, doing the full frequency range, and a proper arranger, whether it's a a Mozart or somebody like that, or it's a Skrillex. And I really do think he is on that level for contemporary music, making things that all fit in the right place, and then also have a great groove, and also, you know, musically are interesting, and sometimes have a tune you can sing along to. It's phenomenally fun to listen to.
Imagine you have a song and it has a vocal and chords, and the chords are, you know, occupying, you know, low mids, very very cello, you know, area, and harmonically supporting, say it's a female vocalist, so the vocalist is sitting on top. So the only thing in the high end is the vocal in the verse. And then maybe you get to a section in the pre, I'm thinking about the orchestra, you get to the pre-chorus and the cello then drops out and it thins out, and maybe the singer comes down and gets intimate to like set up whatever's to come next, and it hollows out a bit. Something goes up an octave and it's airy. But nothing, you're not just adding the airy thing to the element that's there. You're taking a perspective shift. The vocals coming down. You're moving. Like, this is what we're talking about when we mean arrangement in pop music, when a lot of things, like, there's a moment and then another thing comes in and then more things come in and then the chorus and then just more shit comes in. But if you were to simply do what I'm talking about, which is just low mid element, chordal, harmonic, high vocal, switch the perspective, the violas come in, or the right hand of the piano goes up in the pre, and in the chorus, you soared vocally and went back to that warmth, that is going to make a song feel like a unique arrangement simply with only two elements, right? Like, that's what you would do on a guitar. Like, if you're recording, playing guitar, singer-songwriter-y song, like, you go up on the neck for the pre and thin it out and make something happen so you can come back down, and then you just, like, dig in and you're in the chorus. Like, you don't need more. You actually probably need less in a section, so then when it comes back to the same, it feels like more. And that's what I think I get a lot from Skrillex when I talk about the events. Like, the drops are three elements. Besides some sort of like high percussion that's keeping, it's like a subliminal hypnotization thing, like the percussions that just go. He probably has like 8 loops for that shit. They're so unimportant. They're so artful, and he's the best at that thing. But like deadmau5 was really good at that. Like the top loop concept or whatever. That's so secondary to when the drop comes in, the bass. But there's one bass sound, and there's one fuzzy high end like atmosphere synth tickly thing, and then percussion, and that's it. And maybe a vocal chop in certain sections. He's not going ham. And it doesn't sound like a Katy Perry production, you know? That's not the same thing. I think it's a lot more artful than that, personally speaking. I think that Fireworks is also artful, and I think Teenage Dream is also artful in its own way. There's something about them. Skrillex sounds more like an orchestra to me, in arrangement.
Yeah, and it gets to that, again, with like loudness. Loudness is not putting, you know, you don't get the loudest snare drum by putting 100 snare drum samples. You get the loudest snare drum by the right combination of sounds and frequencies that sound clear and aren't phasing and hit you right in the face. And I know anybody who's programmed drums before and tried to layer kick drums knows this from trying to get low end to sound right. And it's very hard to get multiple kick drum samples without a lot of filtering to add up to something that feels strong. And I say strong because as soon as you add multiple low-end sources, things start phasing. And sometimes you can get lucky and you pop a couple things in and out of phase and they add up to a really nice thing. But by and large, it's hard to get multiple things doing, you know, you talk about this sometimes with mixing like keyboards. If you have 4 keyboard parts playing the same sound, as a mixer, you will just go, great, that's the sound, and I will treat that as one thing. Because if you start trying to do too much with things that are in the same frequency range, it's just all going to kind of blend together. And sometimes that's the idea.
Yeah, that's fine.
Blend. But like a kick and a snare and a drop where you have a sub bass, and Skrillex, you know, seen some of the sessions and people talk about this, there's like a high frequency element and a sub element, and you think, okay, he's layering, but he's not really layering. Here is the sub, and here is a super, there. It's almost like the whole mid-range is gone out of the stuff. So you get the excitement of a high-end like thing, and then you just get sub going.
There's nothing above 90 in the sub bass.
It's crazy how those, yeah, absolutely. And go ahead, yeah.
No, I think, I mean, this is this is the conversation when it comes to when you're in the room, and it's what Frank Ocean records sound like. There's nothing unnecessary in a Frank record, right? There's certain music that's made that you wouldn't change a thing about. And it's normally these records that are very bare and everything was decided upon. There's a consensus taken by the producers, the artists, like that element's necessary. That when versus the opposite, overly dense, I just mixed this thing the other day. Very, very standard pop record, not bad, not great. And producer's amazing. I love, what a nice guy. And having a great time mixing it. Gave me a few simple notes before the mix. One of them was, hey, just want the low end to hit a little bit harder than I have it. Like, it's in a really good place. Only thing I had to do was flip the phase on the 808 to the kick relationship. I didn't have to boost 60 hertz. The bass was out of phase with the kick transient. So when it hit, it just was canceling out the kick. Yeah. So like, I have good monitors. I did that. Like, I didn't have to do too much. Now, if that was sorted, then I would have had to do less. So when Skrillex is making these decisions, he's not leaving decisions to be made at the end, I'd imagine, right? I would imagine when Frank is deciding what part to put in, whether it's going to be only a Wurlitzer or if he's going to blend a Rhodes in underneath it, like that's decided and chosen and not fucked with later. Like, what are you going to EQ out 300 hertz in the Wurlitzer later in a Frank Ocean record? Like, cool for your job. Like, if I got to mix Frank Ocean, I imagine I'm not doing that much work. Yeah. I'm imagining it's very, very minute and it's all baked in. Same with Skrillex. Like, now I want to talk to Tom and find out like if there's any heavy lifting on any of these records, because I would love to learn what heavy lifting on a record so masterfully arranged looks like. I really would. Now, if you're talking about like a Lana Del Rey record, I can imagine getting a rough mix from that and being like, I know a lot of shit I could do to make this better. I don't know if it would be right, because she might be like, why did you clear out all the low mids in my reverb? Now
sometimes it needs to sound like a mess. Exactly. Sometimes that's artistically the thing to do.
Yeah, so I imagine like there's the time where you think you need to do something and then it's, you actually don't. You think it's better, and then you might even fight the artist and the producer saying, oh, but it's better. You can hear more. And the artist is like, I didn't want to be heard. I'm insecure about this lyric. Like, why are you making it so clean? Like, why are you doing this? Like, there's so many versions of this. There's nothing hidden in Skrillex music. He is very secure about his sound choice. I mean, I don't know him personally like that. I've hung out with him a couple of times. He doesn't strike me as an overtly confident human, but when it comes to music, he's fucking confident because every sound is loud and proud.
Well, you're speaking to something that I think about a lot, which, when we talk about this, what we're often talking about is like the idea of minimum effective dose, which is how can you get the most impact while doing the fewest things? And that's largely how I produce when I get hired to finish a production or something like that. I spend the first little bit, other than kind of getting the session together, I just throw everything at it on a creative standpoint. And then the next day or after some perspective, I go and see what I can get away with on a minimal level. It's like, it's a very idealized way to think about records. And of course, there are amazing, super dense, from Phil Spector Wall of Sound and Bohemian Rhapsody to like, there's amazing versions of really dense, intense arrangements. Although even Bohemian Rhapsody, you go in and listen to the parts, and it's
those
phenomenal.
Examples are masterful orchestrations.
Masterful orchestration. It's really hard to do this. Yeah. It's really hard to be Skrillex or Frank Ocean. Yeah. And by the way, I would imagine even for them, it's hard to do it because you're just hearing, as they say, when you compare yourself to other people, you're comparing your practice routine to their highlight reel. Like, you don't see all the work that goes into it and all the stuff that doesn't sound great and all the things that clash and are a mess and the hours and days and months that they spend trying to rearrange and redo things.
But those people, Skrillex is not mixing 300 songs for other artists. Totally. This is his thing, right? So he's putting all of his energy into his sound design. This is true. I love today's conversation about this because I'm so in love with what he does. I think that there's no one like him. I think the reason why he's so good is because he's him, and he sits there and he probably fucking geeks out for hours over that bass sound I'm talking about. That bass sound was not a preset, and it wasn't decided upon in 4 minutes or 30 seconds. Maybe it was. I'd be shocked. That sounds like a beautifully crafted. That sounds like days spent on sound design to make instruments to then go back and work with on compositions. It doesn't sound like the sound was picked and then the part was played all at the same time. Again, that would be a question I would wonder, but it sounds like these are sounds that were made, like specially crafted, like we know he does. This isn't like this isn't just like a guess. And the part was written like a guitar riff, and it wasn't improvised and soloed. It feels very compositional. It feels like Bach. It feels like Mozart. It feels memorable. It feels like classical music to me. Just done in a new realm, and not one much different than he has in the past. It doesn't sound like super, inventive, but it's different enough from what we're used to from him that if I want to listen to this one and not go back to a past record. It's really special.
Yeah, it's really special. And I think you may be right. I'm certainly you're right that there's a lot of intense sound design. And, if you have a sound as an artist that involves sound design and synth sounds and drum sounds, and you're doing it consistently for a couple of decades, you're going to develop a sound palette that's pretty incredible. But I also think from, looking at a few things of his and other people who've worked with him and who do similar types of genres, there is a lot of experimentation too. And there is I think he did a Twitch stream, or maybe it was somebody else I think he did some sort of Twitch stream that was, he's like, I like to spend about an hour. I have a melody idea that I sing in my head, and then I get it into a keyboard, and then I'm editing the keyboard, and then I'll switch the sound. But I know there's something there, and I'll just spend about an hour, and then I'll put it aside, and I'll do another one, and I'll do like 3 or 4 of those. Yeah. And then I'll come back the next week or the next day or whatever and kind of go through and see what feels interesting, and then go deeper into the sound design. So I think it's some of that as well, which is
little bit of, yeah.
Which
but you don't think,
and I think,
but my gut would say that those sounds were still made individually,
still probably pretty good
for that versus like a sound bank preset that like everyone has access to.
Definitely. I mean, I think the ability to take presets are a great place to get inspiration and go, but certainly we've talked about this, and I do this a lot as a producer, where if I make a song that I like, if there's a drum sound that I like, I sample that and put it into a folder, and it's part of my MR 2023 drums. There's already a bunch of drums in that folder.
Totally.
And so you're like constantly iterating on the things you're working on. If there's a keyboard sound that I like, I'll save it as a chain in Ableton, and so I can just pull it up in the future. So there's like a combination of all of these things where you're experimenting and pushing. Sometimes you're using your own presets. Sometimes you're going through other stuff. Sometimes you just get a new plugin and you just spend a week just playing with all the presets on that thing. Like it's
totally.
There's no rules for this thing, but yeah, man, I continue to go to the album, and for people that like that album, should also check out the one track he did on this like 3-song EP with 100 gecs called "Torture Me." It's a very insane. There's a very insane Skrillex drop sound design stuff that is super fun and fits in with the Laura and Dylan 100 gecs insanity that they always do.
Really, I really think there's a lot to learn, and I don't know if there's a lot to copy. I don't know that there's a lot that people should take from this conversation and go, I'm going to go filter everything. And like, I'm telling you, I've experimented with this and it doesn't work.
Go do it and see where
it
leads you to some version of what you're doing that's different.
Totally.
Take something from it. And
I think that the takeaway is or one of the possible takeaways would be, does this sound need to remain? And if so, could it be presented better? Could it be arranged higher? You bring up the cello frequency. Like, there are too many things occupying the cello. That's a very common in my world as a mixer. Hundreds of songs. That's the most common problem, quote, for lack of better words, because maybe they're not a problem. Maybe everybody likes it muddy and mysterious. There's a lot of overlap in that register, and people forget about the viola. They forget about where you can take things up a step, that still support the vocal and let the vocal still be here, but just arrange it a little higher, voice the chord higher, not have the root note in every keyboard sound, in every guitar. That's why you have inversion. That's why, it's when you talk about notation in classical music and different clefs, the inversion is notated. There's probably only one root note in one chordal element of any song, any part of the arrangement in a classical piece of music. And these records and these jazz records have stood the test of time for decades on decades. And for some reason in pop, not the best well-written pop songs that people really care about inversions, there's a root note in most. It's like the same MIDI concept where instead of we're talking about Skrillex might go through a melody on a 20 different sounds to see what he likes, come back to it later. We're just layering the same MIDI into 6 sounds in the chorus. Like another song I just mixed, there's literally 8 of the same exact part with different sounds. Some of them are buzzier, some of them are like the concept is there, like you get it, everyone gets it. Like this one has more low mids in it, this one has more high end, but there's 9. Why do there's not 9 elements to the orchestra? Why do we need 9 doing the same synth part? Maybe you needed 3. Maybe you needed a bottom, mid, top. And the inversions of those really matter to how these things stack up and don't build up. And maybe some of them have, no high end in them. So they're just a low mid. So when you hear this is the takeaway from the Skrillex conversation. It's like when he has a low MIDI kind of organy sound, it's just that warmth. Whoa, whoa. Like that, like woofy, but it's so present the way he has that resonant peak on those sounds. Like everything's, that's another thing to mention. It's not just filter and then nothing. It's filter with a peak. So the characteristic of that sound cuts out even more. That's so important. That's how you get kick drums to knock. You don't need 10K in a kick drum. Filter it down to 2 or 3K and get that little peak just so the top end comes in on top of the keyboards and the vocal just enough. You don't need that shit. It's not necessary, and it focuses the sound.
Yeah, and just like the conversation about, I mentioned layering kick drums in the phase of low end being tough. You don't hear it as clearly when you're doing, if you have a root note at 50 hertz and then you add a note with an octave up at 100 and then 200 and 400. But when you start layering too many of the same part, it just becomes less clear. And it's not as noticeable because it's not as obvious as like an out of phase kick drum and all of a sudden the low end doesn't impact. But the same effect happens where if you layer 3 clap sounds, it ends up being less clear in a lot of ways than if you have a small, narrow clap sound, which you can then turn up like crazy and hit you in the face. It applies across drums and keys and all that kind of stuff. And I think you're right that not only is the stuff that Skrillex is doing filtered and EQ'd in the right way, but it's absolutely arranged in a really brilliant way. Big fan of it. Well, we've spent a good 40 minutes on Skrillex, which is totally justified.
Well, we spent 40 minutes on arrangement. He's just very good at it.
I've spent like 5 hours, feels like 5 hours a day listening and talking about his shit because it's so exciting. I mean, it's just cool to hear stuff from someone who was such an innovator a decade ago when he was putting a lot of this stuff out.
Yeah.
And then kind of, not that he took a break, but he's doing some interesting things. But this is the first proper, like, I'm spending my time, I'm doing it this way. Here's 2 albums. He did basically like the rave set at Madison Square Garden and just like coming back with what feels like a lot of inspiration and doing shit that is pushing sounds forward, even though it also feels familiar. It's very exciting. Makes me want to make stuff, which is, there's nothing better for people like us than listening to stuff and going, I want to make things. Whether I make things that sound like it or not, like the excitement of wanting to do it.
Literally, it felt like, I want to get in the studio. That's it. That's what this studying was about. It's like, what am I going to press play on that makes me go, damn, I got to get better. Like I have a long way to go. And I've been looking for that feeling. We've talked about that for a while. I'm a bit uninspired by things sonically. And this did it for me. This is like it. I'm like, all right, like this is very different than what I do and what I get to work on. So I'm not comparing. I'm never going to make something sound like that. But when that happened a decade ago, and Spider and I were at Tony's studio in my little fucking room, we were listening to him and we were saying, okay, what elements of this do you bring into clarity of pop music? Because pop is just dense and samey and overlapping and muddy. And how do you bring clarity at that level and loudness and excitement at that level? And I'm glad he refreshed my memory on that.
Totally. And I've told this before, maybe on here or not, but you know, one of my biggest songs, this Martin Garrix, BB Rexa, In the Name of Love record, when we wrote that song before it was produced out, we wrote it in the wake of Where Are You Now, and you know, that Jack U Bieber record,
so
which
good.
Which just, it was the first time those sounds had really been on the radio and been in the pop music sphere. And it's like, oh, you can do a thing that's a ballad with a drop. And you know, the In the Name of Love is a very different sounding record. It's kind of future based. It's a very different sound than the Jack U stuff. But conceptually, having people around that open the door for, oh, we can do this. It's like the guy who is talked about on a lot of the sort of the podcast stuff, but the guy who went over the high jump backwards for the first time and just beat everybody by 6 inches, or the guy who broke the 4-minute mile for the first time, and then within a year 2 other people did, or a month. Like, once you know that something's possible, it just gets you excited about making stuff. And so, you know, when I went in, hearing some of when Supersonic came out and some of this other Skrillex stuff, I was like, let me just play with gain staging and see if I can redo this, use a lot of limiters, and see what it sounds like when I do it. And it doesn't sound the same, and I apply it differently, but it just got me excited about doing new shit. And now my stuff feels like it's in a different place than it was, which is fundamentally why I'm a writer and producer and mixer and all these things at once, because I like getting excited and just exploring. So whatever gets you there.
Same. Exploring. So speaking of that note, because I only have like 5 minutes left, I've taken everything off my mix bus, analog gear. Everything's on hardware insert, so I can put them on other elements and maybe make buses for the tubes. Maybe I want the drums not to be going through the tubes on this kind of record, right? Maybe I want the VT5 only on the vocals on this record and crank up that high end and make that vocal sound expensive, and everything else like kind of low key, lo-fi or something. Like maybe there's a dimension shift that I want to happen, that when I have it all on, it does a thing and it's maybe magical, but maybe it's a little too much, right? Like I think I'm experimenting now with like what summing would be like, but in the box. I'm not going to get a summing box. I don't want summing. I don't think it's beneficial, but routing internally to different dimensional buses that will put things in a different place by default, instead of everything going through. When you talk about loudness, you talk about tubes, and things that I like about tubes, I've talked about, you're going to glowing them, getting this full-bodied sound and density and full harmonics. Sometimes that sounds too good or too big. Maybe the bass gets too wide because of it and less centered and focused. Maybe the 808 doesn't need to occupy the left and the right as much as it does the center. So I'm really geeking out in the latest, since we've talked the last couple of weeks about the dimension shifts and where I want things to be placed in mixes, and maybe not. So like kind of going back to, again, it's like looking back when people were excited. Like when Tony was excited about what I was doing, I was mixing really clean, like closer to a Serban approach, like very like chiseled and louder and more compressed. And I'm kind of going back, not to the extent that I'm mixing like Serban, I'm not claiming that, but I'm going back to a cleaner approach to where like things not overlapping. Like we're talking about arrangement overlapping. There's also sonic overlapping, where when you are saturating a lot, you make things take up similar spaces. Versus if you're like really chiseled on your EQs, you're giving things separation. So, like a lot of producers like to call it. Post black, yes, post black. This is after this album, because we mixed most of this in December and then I finished it up recently. So yes, to answer that question. And I wish I was doing this a little bit on black. That's why I'm gonna look. But I love how that record sounds. So I don't care. But yes, post that on some newer shit. I kind of like paved a new way for what I'm doing, and I'm very excited about it. Someone actually just mentioned this Teo record that they thought sounded good. I'm actually working on, he's one of the albums I'm doing right now, a new album, and one of the songs I was experimenting with this routing and literally just took everything off. And like I had already mixed this song, Teo already liked it, and then I took the mix bus off, and it just hit harder. And I was able to like turn up the kick even more. And I was like, yo guys, I don't even know if you've listened, but here's a new one. And they were like, holy fuck, like what happened? And I'm like, I just took gear off and I was able to do some things. I still used the gear. I'm not going to talk about where it wound up because it's irrelevant, but the gear all made the cut just in a different way. And I'm fucking with that so everything doesn't have the same sauce on every instrument.
Quick question, because I know you got a hard out.
Yeah.
People were asking about the various speaker things you've been doing. You've been showing pictures of speakers. What have you been doing?
I want to try. I miss. There's a nostalgia for me as a mixer to have a two-way speaker, something small. It seems to maybe translate a bit differently to like restaurant speakers, car, smaller devices. I feel like pure luxury having $100,000 or whatever three-way speakers that no one will ever hear music on. They definitely have clarity that is unparalleled, and in the low end specifically, in low mids, that I don't think any other speaker has. And I value them.
Two-way, you mean woofer and tweeter is two-way, and then three-way would be
added mid-range driver, between the woofer and or multiple woofers in my example. And I've been trying these ATCs and I'm trying the PMCs, and I think I'm going to probably land on the PMCs. Obviously not surprising to people that know me. I'm very open to the ATCs being the one, but I had more fun on the PMCs, and I think they really nailed this 6. I think also if I was ever to have a second studio, and like if I ever, moved out of the studio living wise and like needed a bedroom setup, so I don't have to come back to the studio, whether that's like in Santa Barbara or in Los Angeles, I would have these speakers in that room. Like they're so fucking good.
What are they?
They're the PMC 6s,
okay.
Not the 2 6s. They're just the new 6s. I was geeking out with like Mike Miller, and I texted him that I actually forgot that I was on them for an hour. I thought I was on the MB3s. They're so big sounding.
The MB3s are your big ones?
They're the big ones. MB3 XBDs. I thought I was on them the whole time. I looked at my Grace monitor controller and I was on the B speaker, and I was like, whoa, this, like, I actually tricked myself, and I'm not making that up. Like, it was like a whole sensation of these sound tall. They almost sound too good. Like Rory's point of view was like, they might be too good for what I'm looking for. Maybe like it'd be nice to have something different, like a boxier, like woodier speaker. That's why I tried the ATCs. And I think I'm going to get a similar effect that I'm looking for out of the two-way with a more fun speaker. Like the PMCs are just fun to work on. I just have a better time. And there's a nostalgia to small speakers that I feel like I forgot the importance of.
Yeah, I was just saying, I love ATCs and I love PMCs. They just sound so different that I feel like I would find it disorienting to go back and forth. I almost feel like if you're going to do that, then get NS10s or the Oratones or something where it's like really a whole different thing. So I see what you're saying. Well, I'm curious to see what it all sounds like when you.
I love them. They're very good. I would recommend these speakers to anybody. They're really fun. They're so surprising about a low end too.
Yeah.
Just to put them up against the wall like the Unfuck guys talk about. Shit's punchy. I mean, if I needed to go, say an artist wanted me to go mix at Henson or at another studio, I would just bring these and put them in the room, and I'd be confident. They're very good.
Nice, man. Well, it's great to see you again. I'm back in town. Let's hang. Let's get a dinner. We're overdue for like several dinners. So
I know. Got to go to Bistro now.
I don't know what that means, but I'm in.
That's where we were supposed to go before you couldn't make it.
Oh yeah, and that's because I got a nice little sinus infection. Feeling much better. Let's go do it. Good to see you, my friend, and love you.
Talk to you soon.